All right, good morning. It's Bernard Nomberg with another weekly edition of Nomberg Law Live. And I've got my friend Nick Brockmeyer from the St. Louis area on the other side. How you doing this morning, Nick?
Good. How are you, Bernard?
I'm doing well, and I appreciate you having a little time for us this morning for our conversation. I've been looking forward to chatting with you for a little while now, and I'm really anxious to dive into our topic, which is my favorite sport, baseball. But before we do that, if you would tell us a little bit about yourself personally and your practice.
Yeah, so I've been a lawyer for 15 years, and when I got out of law school, I had the benefit of coming to work for my father, who has been practicing for 40 plus years. So I practice law in our general law firm here in St. Charles, Missouri, do predominantly criminal work, and then a completely separate entity is Platinum Sports, which is a baseball agency here in St. Louis that I run.
Excellent, excellent. Now, when you have to divide your time professionally, is there a certain percentage that you do one more versus the other?
Yeah, there is, but it changes, I think, on the time of year. So if it's free agent period or arbitration period, it may be 90% baseball related, or spring training specifically in March. I'm gone most of March to Florida and Arizona. So it may be 100% baseball. And then there's other times where, the season's rolling along fine and it may be 80% law work.
Well, I can't imagine it being very tough, at least for me, being a baseball fan, having to spend time in spring training and work. I know you're working, you're not there for leisure, but it must be interesting. How many springs now have you been going to Arizona and Florida as part of your agency?
This will be probably I don't have a count, but I would say the 15th year of Florida and Arizona coming up.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's outstanding. Well, I know you and I talked yesterday a little bit, coming from a small town, Bell City, Missouri, with a graduating class of, what did you say, a dozen kids. Are you still in
Right.
touch with any of the high school graduates, the people you grew up with?
I am. When you only graduate with 12 people, though, you end up, the high school, has probably, I don't know, 70 people total or 80. It's kind of different than a big high school in that there's a group of seven of us who still talk daily, but
Oh,
I was a graduating class of 96, and the guys in that group consist of guys that graduated in 96, 97, and 98. So it's kind of different when you come from a smaller school like that, your group
sure.
of friends.
Sure, but that's outstanding. If you're still in contact 20 plus years later with at least seven of your high school mates, that's awesome.
Yeah, we still get together twice a year, no matter where we're at in the country. We all, people fly in and we still get together.
Oh, what a great tradition. Those are a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, I know that for your practice, your day-to-day law practice, you practice with your dad and some other attorneys. But before we jump into the baseball part of this, the agency part, talk to us a little bit about your day-to-day practice with your dad. What's that like, and the dynamics of multi-generation Brockmeyers working together.
Yeah, it's awesome and horrible all at once. It's awesome because I get to see my dad every day. We go to lunch every day together, and we get to spend time together. But as you can imagine, there's difficulties as well, generational gap as far as technology and other things. But overall, I would say the pros outweigh the cons. I have two boys, and I hope that the law firm becomes a third generation here in the next decade or so.
Excellent. How old are your sons?
13 and 11.
Oh, well, then not too long they'll be there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But that's outstanding. As I've told you, my brother David and I practice together, and our dad Joel, who just signed on. Good morning, Dad. He's watching us live. Is of counsel, so we get to talk to him from time to time, talk about the casework and what's going on at the firm. But I bet that's a lot of fun, a lot of good memories for you and your dad. That's outstanding.
Yeah.
Well, let's transition. We're on the eve of spring training. This is the last week of January. Spring training's in about 2.5 weeks, give or take, when the pitchers and catchers start reporting. So talk to us a little bit about what you've been doing to prepare for spring training over the winter months. What do you do as a sports agent who has baseball clients? Let's talk about that a little bit. What do you do in the probably your busier time this winter?
Yeah, so each time of year is completely different. I mean, it's not like what you're doing in January is the same as it is in March, and March is different than June or July. So it kind of comes in different segments. So during the winter months, you have the winter meetings. You have to take care of all your free agents and make sure they have teams. And obviously, on Trade Rumors or ESPN, you hear about the big time free agents and arbitration cases. But there are, at any given point, hundreds and hundreds of minor league free agents and just different lower level free agents that still need signed and still need teams. So there's always something going on. I think we're down to, I think, 2 free agents left that need signed. And then moving into March, it is a lot of travel plans, if you can imagine, with a company with 5 agents trying to coordinate rental cars and flights and houses and, for Florida and Arizona and game schedules. And then as well as making sure everyone has the equipment they need going into spring training. Once you come out of spring training, then you obviously have the draft in June. So that's a completely different dynamic going from pro players down to high school players and college players. So each month or each segment of the calendar year is just completely different as far as what we're doing.
Wow. So I bet it's 12 months a year that you're really working on this.
Right. It's just always different as far as what takes priority.
Well, how did you get into, I know you're a baseball fan, but how did you get into this area of practice?
Yeah, my story is a little different. Most people, get an internship or go to work for an agency or know someone. I was in law school. I took a sports law class. I enjoyed it, and I was sitting at my apartment one day and realized it sounds like a ridiculous story, but I was like, I'm going to start a sports agency. And in our early days, it was more of just starting an agency. And so we had boxers and musicians and reality stars and different sports. And that quickly, I realized you can be a what did they say, a master of or a master of all. I forget the saying. I'm sounding like George Bush right now. But anyway, you can't be a master of all of them. So anyway, I quickly realized we needed to narrow our focus. Baseball was where my passion was, and we really zoomed in on baseball. So yeah, it was just starting an agency from scratch by myself. Now we have an ownership group. We have 5 agents, and we represented hundreds, if not thousands, of players over the last 15 years. And kind of funny to look back on with just a guy with an idea, and it's still here.
Well, it's a real tribute to hard work and having a dream and not getting deterred or not letting things get in your way. What is your favorite time of the year when dealing with sports agency and baseball?
I would say I don't know that there's a favorite. I mean, spring training is obviously fun, catching up with players. I always tell people that during the season, our players are located throughout the country. During the off season, they're located throughout the country. So March is kind of the one month where all baseball players are either in Florida or Arizona. So we're able to catch up with most all of them. That's always fun to go out to dinner with each one, go to games. I know it sounds tough, but anyway, that's always fun. The draft is always fun. Watching kids realize their dream of getting drafted into Major League Baseball. That's exciting. Obviously, the baseball season itself is always fun. And then, as a lawyer and a sports agent, I enjoy the off season with negotiations and free agency and arbitration and all that.
Well, it sounds like you really enjoy what you're doing, and that passion, I'm sure, is there for you. At times, I'm sure it's also exhausting with as much travel as you might do.
Yeah.
But I want to talk to you a little bit about the minor leagues for a few minutes. I'm based in Birmingham. We have the AA Birmingham Barons, which is a Chicago White Sox affiliate, and I love the Southern League. All of it seems like so many great potential and future Major League ball players come through here. Now, we don't have the Memphis AAA Cardinals, but we've got, they're all over in Mississippi, Alabama, some in Georgia and Tennessee, and the Florida Panhandle. And you get to, as a fan, I'm a little more than a casual. I'm a little bit obsessed with baseball at times. But when you're in a minor league ballpark and you're able to literally brush shoulders with some of the players, like some of the the pitching staff, for example, will sit in the bleachers because some of the pitching staff who've just pitched, they're charting the pitches for the next
Right.
for the current game. So and they're friendly. But things seem to change when the guys move up to AAA and then into the major leagues. They're not as accessible. So I guess what do you guys counsel your ball players as they're coming up through the system about how to treat the public? Because of who they are or what they're doing, they automatically become in the spotlight. How do you guys counsel those players on that?
Yeah, I have a couple points to make there. One is a pet peeve of mine is when people say, such and such players in the minor leagues, they're not very good. And I always say, well, name your favorite baseball player of all time, and they name them, and I'm like, well, that guy was also in the minor leagues. So just because someone's in the minor leagues does not mean they're not good. An avid baseball fan like yourself realizes that, I think, but a casual fan sometimes thinks that, and that's a real annoying thing to me. Secondly, I always tell my players that get annoyed by fans that you have to remember at the end of the day, if fans didn't exist, then they wouldn't have a job. I mean, all the revenue that then goes into the players' pockets, the way they get paid is the fans. If you guys didn't show up to games in Birmingham, then, they wouldn't be able to support a team there. And then third is I try to lecture to players to remain who you are no matter how big you get. You're still a human being. You're not bigger than anyone else. And I would say some players get that and they remain themselves, but obviously I've had examples where players say, yeah, I get that, but then they get to the big stage and they kind of forget where they came from and, become bigger than themselves, and that's disappointing.
There's so many examples of those athletes, whether they've accomplished a lot statistically or championships, that really just forget where their roots really are and who they were back in the day before they were the accomplished superstar, if you will, who they are now. And that's a real shame. But I guess the more refreshing stories, one I can think of is Cal Ripken Jr. As successful and as award-winning and accomplished and Hall of Fame and all of that, it seems like he always made time for everybody. And currently, I love the way Mike Trout treats the public. It seems like he may be the most popular player right now, or in the top three, if you will, and he's certainly on the path to a Hall of Fame career statistically. But he seems to always make time for anybody who wants a quick picture or an autograph. And I wish more young athletes, regardless of where they are in the system, to be able to follow that lead. Nick, talk to me a little bit about when you look at an organizational depth chart. Let's take the Cardinals, your closest team, and I know that as a kid and probably even until you got deep into being a sports agent, that was your team. I know so many St. Charles and St. Louis area lawyers and friends from college who are there, and the Cardinals are just such a great franchise, one of the top franchises historically in MLB. But my comment for you is, when you look at an organizational chart and you see who's the starting catcher for the Cardinals, and I assume it's still Molina, but then you look through the chart, how many catchers, when you go down through the major leagues and all through the minor leagues, how many catchers are in that system? I don't think most people realize this.
Are you saying just catcher specifically?
Yeah, just look at just catcher. We'll just take catcher.
Oh, there's a ton, yeah.
I mean, couldn't there be 20, 30, 40 catchers all in through the system, maybe even more? I don't know. I'm asking.
I don't think there's that many, but I think there's more than what you would think. I don't think there's more than 20, though. But, yeah, there's a lot of catchers. Catching's a hard job, and part of the reason there's a ton of catchers and a lot of catchers go to spring training is because if you think of all the pitchers that need work, obviously, Molina can only catch, so many, and they want to save his knees. We're using Molina as an example because of the Cardinals. Sure. But at big league spring training, I mean, there's a ton of pitchers there that need work. So you got to think of all the catchers they need brought in to catch all those guys.
Yeah, it's just, I think maybe the casual fan may look at the Major League roster and recognize some names because it's their hometown or their favorite team. But what they may not appreciate is just how many, when you look at the organization, if you're in A ball for the Cardinals, for example, how many rungs up the ladder you've got to work before you get, assuming you stay within the company, I mean, stay within the organization, how many are ahead of you, so to speak. It's way different than looking at, say, a college football depth chart. When you're the third string quarterback, there's only two ahead of you, but there may be a dozen or more ahead of you. And I don't know if guys look at it that way, but it's always just been an interesting point to me.
Well, in certain positions, pitcher, if you're a pitcher, you can obviously move up because there's, always a need for pitchers, and you can be a reliever or starter, and there's obviously multiple roles for starters and relievers at each level and in the bigs. But like catchers is a prime example of, and let's go back to the Cardinals and Molina over the last, 15 years or whatever. How many Cardinal catchers have made it? Not many, if any, because there's a logjam at that position.
Right.
I mean, obviously, it's a little better if you can play middle infield, they can move you around, or corner outfield, they can move you around, or pitcher, like I said. But catching specifically, that's a problem. If you're a Cardinal catcher, there's nowhere to go.
Not for them. Again, in my opinion, another potential Hall of Fame player. But let's transition a little bit, Nick, and let's talk about the draft, which is in June each year. I know it's moved over the years. I don't like when the draft is held because selfishly, my team is my alma mater, Vanderbilt. And they've had great success under Coach Corbin over the last 15 years. Several guys get drafted, usually one or two in the first round, but it always falls. And I've heard several of the college coaches and athletic directors talk about this same thing. So it's not an original thought to me. The draft is usually during either the either during the College World Series or just before the College World Series is starting. And it seems to obviously be on the minds of the players when they ought to be focused on the World Series itself. Have you had the experience in your agencies where you've had college players or high school players who are drafted in that first, second, or third, rounds, but they're also still playing at the same time? Have y'all had that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with you. If you took all other factors out, they should have it after the College World Series. The problem lies in there are a lot of these guys, once they're drafted, they go off to what's called rookie ball or short season ball. And those seasons don't start until right after the draft. And, that's the town, somewhere up in the New York Penn League. That's the town team. And so their season's already short. So if you were to move the draft back too far, that's really cutting into those seasons, which is cutting into the revenue of those teams, which is, cutting into the economics of the whole town, which kind of goes on to another subject about minor league contraction if they ever get there and start eliminating these teams like they're trying to. But I know this year they've tried to move the draft back. Like I was telling you, it's a problem with the Max Law Conference this year because they moved it back a few days. Right. And I believe they're doing it from Omaha during the College World Series. So instead of maybe super regionals, they're moving it to the College World Series time frame and putting it in Omaha. But I'm not sure. This is the first year they're doing this, so we'll have to see how that all plays out. But in a perfect world, it would be the week right after the World Series concludes. But I assume there's some dynamic from those short season teams that's causing that not to happen.
Well, sticking with the draft, take us through the mindset of a high school or college player who is going to be drafted, regardless of where they're going to be drafted. Take us through the mindset and some of the discussions that you're having to work through with the draft-eligible player.
Right. So you can be drafted, obviously, after your high school senior year. And there's some smaller rules, but generally speaking, after your junior year or your third year, if you go to a D1, after each year at JUCO. So specifically a high schooler, that's college junior. If you're having a good year, you're generally not going to come back for your senior year if you get drafted because you lose all your leverage. So, and having said that, there are a lot of college seniors that do get drafted and go on to have great careers, but their signing bonuses are usually quite low. But as far as a high schooler, that's tricky because, you have a scholarship to a school. You have to decide whether or not, you want to go to college or go play pro ball at 18 years old and get shipped off to some small town that you've never heard of, be away from mom and dad versus in the life of luxury is going to be a lot less in the low-level minor leagues than it would be if you went to a D1 school like Vanderbilt. So there's a lot of factors to weigh. How academically inclined the kid is, whether or not, education's important to him. You don't want to send a kid off to college if you think that he's potentially going to flunk out of college anyway with the stress of academics and baseball. So there's just a lot of factors to weigh with a high school kid, more so than, a junior in college.
Well, coming out of high school versus being a third-year player, there seems to be a big experience, life lessons, and maturity differences. Two examples, and I stick with the Vanderbilt program because that's just what I follow. Kumar Rocker, dad was Tracy Rocker, played in the NFL. Finances coming out, I assumed he was going to be a first-round draft pick coming out of high school, but there wasn't necessarily the financial push or need for him to immediately come out. He goes to Vanderbilt and has a phenomenal freshman year. Al Leiter's kid out of New Jersey, I think his name is Jack, same situation. Leiter kid played in the pros Al Leiter pitched in the pros for years. He also is going to be coming out of high school this past year, was going to be a very high draft pick. He chose to go to Vanderbilt. Now he's going to be on the same pitching roster with Kumar Rocker. But those guys, I think, are the exception and not the norm because money was not a pressing. I'm assuming this was one of the decisions. I know that Mrs. Rocker, the mom, said that she wanted Kumar to have some academics, and that was one of the factors there. But for every two of those type of situations, there's probably 100 kids who, from a financial standpoint, feel that pressure. How do you guys deal with that pressure standpoint and counseling your ball player who really needs the money? Talk to us a little bit about that.
It's interesting when you're dealing with a high school player. I feel like most of the time you're dealing with the parents more than the college junior. Not to say the college junior, the parents aren't at the meeting, but that 3-year difference, it's kind of like a kid and dealing with a kid versus dealing with a man at that point. So a lot of the times the decisions are and communication are more on point with the college player versus the high school parent. And you also, like you said, you have to look at the financial situation of the family. One thing is, when you're talking to a high school player and you're talking about a couple $100,000 and you're 18 years old, that seems like probably 20 million to you and I. So the understanding that 200,000 after taxes, they're not set for life. But when you're 18 years old, that feels like a lot of money.
Sure it does. Sure it does. Nick, let's talk about the money aspect of minor leaguers. The exception would be the ball players who are drafted in the first, maybe the first couple of rounds. They're going to get, and I know there's slotted amounts for certain positions when you're drafted in the draft, but minor leaguers for themselves, they don't make much money. And I don't think the average fan realizes that. They just see that, oh, you're a professional athlete, you're getting paid big bucks. But talk to us about the reality of what minor leaguers actually make during the season.
Yeah, so I'll walk through an example. Obviously, like you said, a first rounder may get millions of dollars and have plenty of money to live on while they're in the minors. And then there's some players that the family has a lot of money. But let's talk about a guy that's like a fifth-year senior. He may get in college. He may get $1,000 signing bonus and a plane ticket. So he arrives in the minor leagues. He's probably making less than $10,000 a year. So when you break that down by all the time they're supposed to be there, I mean, he's living well below the poverty line, eating whatever they put in the locker room, whether it's a cheese sandwich or peanut butter and jelly, like the nutrition's not there. And that's why I think you see this ongoing litigation where they're trying to get minor league wages up. Major League Baseball's reaction to that is, well, then we'll just cut, we'll contract minor league teams, which is not the answer either. These are billion-dollar teams making lots of money, so I don't think it's crazy to say why can't we pay these guys $30,000 or $40,000 a year to get them somewhere above the poverty line.
And I have seen, just from interacting with some of the coaches at the Barons, again our AA team, and some of the players, a lot of those guys end up doubling up or tripling up, living together just to save expenses.
Yeah, it's a rough lifestyle.
And they're expected, I assume, once the season ends in late August, early September, aren't most of them strongly encouraged, if not required, to play fall ball somewhere?
Yeah, and I mean, there's guys that have to go to instructional league with the teams in the fall, with the major league teams. They're not paid for that, so they're just expected to be there with no pay. Spring training, they don't get paid. I mean, that's part of this litigation that's going on. Is as far as employment law, I feel like, I don't practice employment law, but I feel like there's some problems having people required to be places and not paying them.
Well, and I meant to do this a few minutes ago, Nick, but I'm enjoying our conversation. I wanted to welcome those who are watching us live. I've got Nick Brockmeyer from St. Charles, Missouri. He part of his practice is Platinum Sports and Entertainment. It's a sports agency, and they have multiple agents. Is it predominantly baseball now, or do you do other sports as well, or other?
It's 100% baseball now.
Baseball. And Nick, if folks want to reach out to you, if they're interested in getting involved in sports agency and just kind of want to pick your brain a little bit, how do they reach you?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to our website at psemagents.com. It's a stagnant page, but there's a contact us form. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, however they want to reach out. That'll work.
Okay, and I'm going to put in the show notes here, I'm going to put a link to your website so folks can reach out to you. Share with us a little bit, what has been one of or a couple of your best memories being involved in the sports agency business?
So I'll tell a story. So when you start a sports agency, you have no clients. And so you need to go after, when you go into a living room and they say, who do you represent? No one wants to hear that, you don't represent anyone. So there was, at the time, up until last year, there was a independent league team here in St. Charles County. And so there were a couple guys that were picked up. They weren't drafted out of college, even their third or fourth years in college. They were an independent league, and they got picked up into pro ball. So my two first clients, I mean, the statistical probability of older guy, not drafted. So back then there was 50 rounds. So these guys weren't drafted after 50 rounds their junior year, 50 rounds their senior year. They go play independent league. They're getting paid, I don't know, $200 a month, something crazy. They get picked up. So I needed, though, some clients so that when I went to a living room, I was able to say, I represent Bernard, and he plays for the Angels, and just hope they didn't go Google who that was. So I picked up these two guys, my first two guys out of the independent league. They get signed, and the probability of those guys making the major leagues is probably way south of 1%. But I had a couple guys in my stable. Well, one of them, Justin Christian, ended up making it all the way up to the bigs with the New York Yankees. He ended up winning a World Series ring with the San Francisco Giants and had a decent little major league career. And the other one was Joe Thatcher, who made it up to the big leagues with the Padres. He pitched in the bigs with the Padres, Astros, D-backs, and Angels. And he ended up having a 10-year major league career. So those are the stories that I'll always remember, because without those two guys making it, I probably wouldn't have the wherewithal to keep doing it. So it was like hitting the lottery twice there with those first two guys.
That's awesome. That's the kind of stories that help build careers, like you said, and you took a chance, they took a chance, and you both all three of you ended up succeeding in your respective paths. Those are, for all of those type stories, I'm sure you have countless stories where you have the can't miss kid and something happens, either they're injured or between their ears, they just can't handle it. I'm sure there's many stories like that.
Nick, I probably have hundreds of those, but those aren't happy ones to share.
No, they're really not. And the only reason why I bring it up is when you're 9, 10, and 11 years old and you're seeing those guys on the minor league or major league fields, those are your dreams. I'm going to be a major league ball player one day. But statistically, it's a very, very small percentage. I don't know what the current numbers are. I have read that statistically, baseball has, from a sheer numbers for kids standpoint, has not been holding its own in the last 10, 15 years. You may know better than I, but I'm hoping, and I think this has been an initiative on the minor league and major league levels about trying to appeal to those kids, because it's just not the fast-paced sport that today's goldfish attention span mentality requires. Have you ever dealt with that, or do you deal with that with some of the ball players?
I mean, yeah, I even deal with my own two kids. They're 11 and 13, and like to have them sit through a whole game. They both play select baseball, but as far as to get them to watch a whole game when they can, do other things, it's not that exciting for them. I find them a lot on like Instagram or whatever, YouTube, and they like to watch the highlight videos of the flashy catches or whatever. But to sit through and watch the game that you and I can sit and watch for 2 hours and appreciate all the small intricacies. I just don't know if this generation has the attention span to do so, and that's a problem.
Let me give you a quick example that may give you a chuckle. I go to anywhere from 10 to 30 minor league games a year when my schedule permits downtown. It's only a couple miles from the house. I don't do it nearly as much as I used to, but I like to keep score. It keeps me involved in the game. I kind of like to think strategies. I mean, I know that's the baseball nerd in me, but if I'm keeping score, can I tell you how many people during the course of a game sitting around us will want to either look at the scorecard themselves or asking me what I'm doing or trying to get me to show them how to keep score? It's a lost art. But how many people do you see these days who do stuff who aren't, say, a scout at a game? And they're not even really doing that. But it just seems like that's a lost passion in the sport.
Yeah, I see very few people keeping score, and when I do, they're usually they're not the younger generation.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you put it very kindly, very mildly.
Right.
Well, Nick, we're getting close to the end of our conversation, and personally speaking, I could talk to you for hours about this stuff just because of my love of baseball. But I want you to share with us a little bit about how you counsel some of your new clients, some of the kids who haven't made it up to the pros, about the reality and expectations about what they're about to embark on in a professional career.
Yeah, I think the best advice there is to not sugarcoat it and just tell them how it's really going to be, that it's not going to be glamorous as they're coming through the minor leagues, and they're going to have to work hard, and that it's not so much about they're used to growing up playing where it's important for the team to win and the team atmosphere, but in the minor leagues a lot of times your locker mates are guys that are gunning for the same job, so it's just a completely different dynamic, more about development at the minor leagues. Not to say that no one cares if your local team there in Birmingham wins a title, but for the most part they don't. It's each guy, it doesn't really even want to be there. They want to be at the next level.
Well, that seems to be a struggle, at least in Double-A, from what my observations. In 2013, the Barons won the Southern League title, and I looked at that roster about 2 years later. It had Marcus Semien. It had, I could go on, but they had 14 or 15 of their players made it into the major leagues, some of whom have had very productive careers. Semien was a finalist for the MVP this year. But it seems to be the exception. The years after that, they've had a slew of great players, including last year, Nick Madrigal and Luis Robert, among others, but they don't stay in Double-A very long. They seem to move to Triple-A or up to the parent club after September. And keeping minor league teams together, that doesn't happen because of the needs of the clubs ahead of them. So, and I'll close with this, with my question to you. When a kid gets called up, one of your clients gets called up to the major leagues, how do you guys approach that? I know that's a happy day, but how do you guys, from an emotions standpoint, communicate with that player? How's that dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, from a strictly business standpoint, when they get called up, a lot of times we're going over what that means and paperwork and such. But the most important thing that people don't realize is, they get called up, and sometimes you make your big league debut, and the next day you're back in Triple-A. With options and such. I mean, there's guys I assume like Mike Trout that the day he gets called up, he never ever goes back to the minors, but that's the exception. a vast majority of players who get called up, they're going to end up back in AAA at some point because of roster flexibility and they have options left. So I always tell people that AAA is like the most unhappy place on earth because everyone in AAA has either been in the bigs and they're back down and they're hating life, or they're in AAA and they know that they're only one day away from the major leagues and they want to be there. So I always find that the most unhappy players are at AAA.
For me, my observation is AA seems to be the sweet spot in the minor leagues because we've got guys who've been on the rosters who may be rehabbing in Birmingham and they're only down for a couple of days or a couple of games, or you've got those other guys who are on that trajectory like Robert and Madrigal who aren't going to stay very long. I was fortunate to watch them play for a few weeks, but you just knew you could see their star power. When Robert's hitting 400 feet home runs and like it's nothing, these guys aren't staying around very long.
Right.
But Nick, as I said, I could talk with you all day, but I sure appreciate your time and sharing some of your stories and really giving us a little bit more of the reality about how professional baseball works. But anything else? I know you've got with 2 to 3 weeks going into spring training. Are your plans set, your bags packed, or is that kind of what you're in the middle of doing now?
I'm a guy that packs the night before in about an hour. But yeah, right now we're working through the logistics. Usually, it's like a 3-page itinerary for the company, so we're working through a lot of that. And yeah, you're coming to St. Louis for Max Law Conference, right?
Yeah, in June.
Okay. Like I said, I probably won't be there much because of the draft. But if you have some free time, our draft room is probably 10 minutes from the hotel where the conference is. So if you want to swing by, we'd be happy to host you for like an hour, and you can watch us work live at the draft room.
I don't think what you've realized what you've just done. It's not if I have time. It's I'm going to be there. So
okay,
you'll hear from me.
You're invited to come by.
Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you for your time. I wish you the best this season. I look forward to seeing you in June, hopefully, second week of June.
All right. Thanks, Bernard.
Well, guys, that'll do it for today. Awesome conversation with Nick Brockmeyer out of St. Charles, Missouri, as we do every Tuesday at 10 o'clock Central, 8 a.m. Pacific, NOMBERG Law Live. We try to bring you interesting conversations with people in their areas of expertise, and Nick certainly fits the bill. So you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll catch you next week.